Hello and welcome to the Gamecock Central podcast. This is Chris Gillespie. I've got Collyn Taylor on the phone. We appreciate everybody that had input, who had some questions, suggestions for us. There was quite a bit, so obviously that's going to be something that's going to give us an opportunity to maybe make this into a multiple series type deal. First of all, Collyn, how you doing, sir, in quarantine there?
Cabin fever, my man. Absolute cabin fever. Even though I've gotten to sneak out a couple times to visit the fiance and my family. Don't tell Governor McMaster, but we're slowly approaching madness at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I will definitely say that I was not prepared. I'm sure.
No,
I hope I'm not the only one in this situation. Because my groceries were at a critical level before this. So, yeah, that's where I am. But I've been able to work around it, and everything's good. So, I guess we shall see. But on a more serious note, I hope everybody is doing well. I hope everybody is taking it seriously. Talked to a lot of folks. It did hit close to home. I've had a friend of a friend. I knew this person not as a friend, but he did actually succumb to the virus. So it is very real. Hope people take it seriously, just because don't want that to continue to happen. But on a brighter note, not that I want to gloss over that, but obviously we want to try to keep things light, keep things fun, because this is tough on everyone. And one of the ideas that Collyn and I had was just to kind of talk to each other. We've spent a lot of time on the road together, visited many places, um, covered a lot of mileage, whether it be in Texas, Missouri, Florida, and all points in between, and some not so in between. I guess first and foremost, covering some of the questions that folks have asked. One of the things that we see most often and get asked most often is about the best food experience, and I'm going to go ahead and cut Collyn off here because I know he's going to bring up an incident that happened in Texas. Just want to
you're
just
getting
want
ahead
to
of the
set
storm. Okay, you're
yeah,
good.
just want to go ahead and get ahead of the storm. Go ahead and take the air out of that one. Um, the place was closed. It absolutely was. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. If you don't know what I'm talking
The
about, or if you have no clue what I'm talking about, just remember the place was closed. All right, so moving on. Next
the
question.
the line out the door of this place would beg to differ.
Well,
Um,
my theory
for
is
those,
is that they
for,
were all standing in line because it was closed. They're waiting for it to open the next day.
yeah, sure.
It was just that good of
For
a
those that
place.
don't know, we never got to figure it out. We never learned. Um, the story that he is referring to was our first trip to Texas A&M. At least our first trip to Texas A&M. What year was that? That wasn't the Kurt
Let's see. That would
Roper.
have been
That
2017, I
was
believe.
Yeah, that was the Kurt Roper going conservative in the third quarter game.
Yeah,
Do you
that's the
remember
one
that?
where I'm pretty convinced Jake Bentley had somewhat of a concussion in that game because he looked very loopy from where I was standing.
Um, Number one, Texas A&M, phenomenal place to go travel to. I don't know about you, but that's one of my favorite road trips every other year. But my now fiance, she was obviously my girlfriend at the time, had a friend that interned out at A&M for a summer. And so as we were preparing to go, I texted her and was like, hey, I'm going out there. Any recommendations on food, I would greatly, greatly appreciate. She obviously sent some barbecue, some tacos, some different things like that. You are not as big of a barbecue fan as I am. So we opted to do a fried chicken place for lunch. And then as we were driving away, we were hungry after the game because they feed you, but once you're done working and you on the sidelines running up and down, it's hard to really you work up an appetite. So we were going to look for something to eat, and there was a taco place that she recommended that we drove past. Um, and as we were driving past, I was like, "Oh, can we stop there and get food?" You glance over for half a second. The line is out the door and the lights are on in the place. I'm pretty sure it's 24 hours. And he went, looks closed, and drove off. And in the almost, I'm trying to think, in the almost 8 years that we have been friends and working together, that is the most irate I've ever been at you.
Well, and I'm sure you have like a sliding scale of types of a rate, which is fine because
Yeah.
you have to remember too. I was being very cautious. I was being a very good driver. Didn't want to divert my attention from driving in a town that I'd never been in because Texas A&M is a very confusing place. So I had to make sure that I got us where we were going safe and sound, which I think ended up being a Circle K if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yes.
and not only that,
Because
if
we
you
tried Whataburger.
we did try Whataburger, which I think was probably
I
I
think the
like
run was
Whataburger,
like
don't get
wrapped
me
around
wrong,
the
but I think
building.
Whataburgers are very overrated. It's not one of those things where I feel like you have to have it, but I hear people who just
You just don't. Yeah.
absolutely swear by it, and hey, to each their own, but I'm not a big Whataburger fan. It's essentially, to me, it's not any better than, say, a Rush's around Columbia. So it's, yeah, once again, to each their own. I know folks get very sensitive when it comes to food, so if you want to call me crazy, it won't be the first time that somebody's called me that, but just speaking of the A&M road trip, that is a fun trip. If folks have not had a chance to go on that trip, we've been lucky enough to go a couple of different times. And I know I've just gone down for football. You've gone for baseball, basketball, but that's a neat area. I guess if I had to complain about anything, it would be the fact that you have to fly into somewhere that's maybe hour and a half, close to 2 hours outside. Not that that's a bad thing, because you do get to see kind of the surrounding areas. We flew into Houston on both occasions. It's a good time, but my advice
And
is
there's a
not
Bucky's on
necessarily.
the way.
Yeah, we did stop at the Bucky's. So if you've stopped at the Bucky's, you know what I'm talking about. Or I should say, Collyn is talking about because we both did go there. But that is a neat little place, and just all the little spots in between there, whether they be something fun, something historic. There's a lot of little things going on around there. I want to go visit Waco. I know that sounds weird, but I'm very interested in the not so glamorous history aspects of our country. So I do think it would be interesting just to kind of see that. But that's obviously a little bit more of a trip than is that there's an opportunity for when you're going to a place like A&M. It's not that close, but the Bucky's was cool. That was a neat experience. I'm not a big barbecue fan. I'm sure some of you will think less of me because of that, but I will say that the
I know I
brisket
do.
that and I've given you multiple reasons to think less of me, so just put it on the list. But the brisket we did get there. We got a couple of brisket sandwiches. Those were pretty good. I mean, we did chomp those down pretty good. As far as
At
A and
like 10 in
M,
the morning.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
At like 10 in the morning, too, I remember, because we, like, didn't eat breakfast, and then we hopped on the road, and then immediately got, like, Bucky's, like, at, like, 10 a.m., scarfing out breakfast sandwiches, or, like, brisket sandwiches.
And that was after walking around the massive store and creating some havoc, things like that. Making the little rubber chickens all whine at the same time, stuff like that. It was a fun time. But as far as food, I know that's kind of where we got going on this conversation. But this is so open ended. I'm sure we're probably going to end up on multiple tangents. But as far as food is concerned, I would not say that A&M's food was necessarily the best. It was different. It was, I guess, Texas. I know they had like the what was it, the spicy macaroni and cheese that a couple of folks thought was regular mac and cheese because I saw a couple of folks who were not too pleased when they realized that there was a
Yeah,
little
all the,
spice in it. So that was
yeah.
interesting.
The buffalo chicken mac and cheese up in the press box. That was, I'm not a fan of buffalo chicken, but I tried it, and it was actually pretty okay.
And it's interesting
Actually pretty
because
okay.
not to get too in depth, but it is interesting when you go to these venues to just kind of see how they operate on a game day as far as the media is concerned. Um, and I guess since we're on the topic of A&M, I'll just use that as an example because when you are a part of the media, and I've Colin has, I have had chances to go to multiple venues for multiple sports, but each one does it their own way. So there's not really a consistency from school to school. So you just kind of don't know what you're getting into until you actually get there. And we generally try to get there. Most schools open, what would you say, 3.5 hours before kickoff as an average?
Oh, oh yeah, at least 3 hours before. So we usually try to get there right around, well, I want to say maybe three to 3:15 before.
Right, and A&M's not a bad little drive. It's a fairly flat area out there. You can pretty much see the stadium well before you get there. You When you park in different areas of the campus, of course, and that area is pretty much just a straight shot to the stadium. It's a little bit of a walk, which isn't too terribly bad, but when you're pulling 50, 60 pounds of camera equipment, stuff like that, the closer the better. But that one's not so bad because it is fairly flat. There's not much in the way of hills and stuff like that. It's a pretty neat little atmosphere with A&M being the type school that it is. Definitely different than every other school. It's got its own personality. But the one thing I remember that just really stuck out to me the first time I ever went there is that stadium is just absolutely massive. I used to think that the stadium up in Knoxville, Tennessee was huge, which it is, but it's a different kind of massive in Texas. As they say, everything in Texas is bigger, and well, yeah, it's very, very true. And I know for me, the first time I went there, I wanted to get some pictures of the actual stadium itself before it started filling up with people, and I took a wrong turn because the elevator was taking too long. So I said, well, you know what? I can't be that far up. Let me just go ahead and jump on these steps. And I walked outside to a door that you cannot open from outside. So once the door is shut behind me, I find out that I am way, way up high. And my only option at that point was either bang on the door and look like an idiot, which I do plenty of outside of that. And I ended up having to walk down multiple flights of stairs, and I am not the most fond of heights either. So yeah, that was probably one of my screw ups. Luckily, I wasn't carrying a bunch of camera equipment because that would have made it way worse. But that just kind of opened my eyes to how massive that stadium is. And the staircase was on the outdoors, so you could see straight to the ground, and that was not my favorite. But outside of that, I guess we should probably circle back to food since that was the whole point of beginning
Yeah.
this topic. But that just did kind of steer us to A&M just because of the food. Now, just to speak in my favor, the next time we did go to A&M, I was sure to let Miss Collyn choose all the food spots just to make sure that I didn't get in trouble again. I think the only one that I chose was the little, I don't really know how to describe it, but the place that wasn't so nice before we got up the next morning. That was my choice, and I don't know how we got out of there without getting shot, but we did. Food was decent. The apple pie
And
was good.
dysentery.
Well, yeah, that too. And it was good people watching. We'll just say that. Yeah, good people watching.
What was the name of that place?
I can't
Do
remember
you,
off the top of my
do you
head.
remember?
I'm
I'm
sure I could.
Googling it now.
I'd say I'm sure I could look
Um,
it up, but it was interesting, and I'm sure due to the fact that we were there
Hot
late.
Biscuit.
That sounds accurate.
Hot Biscuit.
Hot biscuit. There we go.
Oh, it's
And I'm
Hot
sure due to the
Biscuit.
fact
It
that
was
we were there the wee hours of the morning, we did take a late flight, so we were eating somewhere around midnight. So think of a place like, I don't know, maybe an old school Denny's, but not as nice, and that'll probably give you an idea of what this place was like.
the weirdest part. We'll actually get to good food here in a second. With Hot Biscuit, I mean, it was number one under an under overpass, which sign one we probably shouldn't have eaten there. But number two, in the daytime, it's a buffet that does seafood and like breakfast food all day. So you're getting the same smells. So like, even though they weren't serving it at the time, the seafood, you got the mix of like what smells like shrimp and pancakes at the same time, which was terrifyingly awful.
Well,
But I will say, I know you are less on the Texas A&M food train. I love the food in College Station. That and LSU are probably my two favorite food locations in the SEC.
now I will say that I have not had a chance to go to any venues at LSU. So this upcoming football season better happen because that is where I get to do hopefully take my first trip down to Baton Rouge, and that would be probably the most anticipated place that I will have gotten to go just because I am huge, huge, huge Cajun fan. That's I'm one of those folks that will go to New Orleans and eat at as many different restaurants as I can, just because the food down there is so amazing. So I'm hoping that Baton Rouge doesn't disappoint. As far as overall food is concerned, outside of the stadium itself, A&M's not bad. We did go to a chicken fingers place the first time we went there, which is just a little off the beaten path college place that we ate, and it was pretty decent. I will honestly say it wasn't too bad. I mean, there's only so much you can do with chicken fingers, chicken tenders, but they did a good job. Originally, I did want to go to the Hullabaloos, but apparently everybody else in Texas A&M also wanted to go there, so didn't get to experience that day. As far as food is concerned, I've got a surprising response here as to where I actually enjoy the most, and I'm going to have to say that was probably Fayetteville, Arkansas, because we did have a
Yeah.
chance there at the Super Regional a couple years ago to stay a while. And of course, the longer you stay, the more opportunity you have to kind of go around and see what's going on. But we did find a couple of different places there that were pretty decent. Speaking of Cajun food, we did find a little Cajun place there, believe it or not, in Fayetteville, Arkansas, that was pretty decent. I won't say the food's the best that I've ever eaten, but considering where we were and the type of food, I thought they did a good job with it. So, once again, the name escapes me. But if you're in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and you're in the mood for Cajun food, there's not a lot of choices, so it'd probably be pretty easy to find if that were the case. So that would have to be my plug as far as for the actual local food where I would have chosen. Now, granted, that's just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's been plenty of places that we've been where the food was pretty daggum goods. So it's not like we're always stuck just eating a Subway. Have to throw that in there because if you don't know anything about Gamecock Central road trips for years and years and years, it was mandatory that we stopped at Subway, but I won't get into why. But let's just say that Subway is not my favorite at this stage. Nothing against the restaurant, but I've eaten there more than I would have cared to, so I still haven't quite recovered from that.
Yeah, I would agree that Fayetteville, Arkansas was surprisingly good. Now, we went down to Fayetteville, and I was probably on the end of my rope. When we'll get to that later when we talk about travel adventures. But, yeah, the Cajun food was really good. And we went to, the benefit of that series was, I think that was a Saturday, Sunday, Monday series for the Super. So we got down there on Friday, really, really early. I think we left at 4 a.m. and flew direct into Fayetteville. So we had time to get food that Friday, but we also, all the games were at night. So we had time to go get lunch and then a snack on the way to the ballpark, which was nice. So that Cajun place was really good. The grilled cheese place.
That was pretty daggum good. Yeah, I had actually forgotten about that one, and that was the one where there was a pterodactyl on the ceiling, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was it was a dinosaur themed grilled cheese place. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, but the worst one though, for as good as those places were, we did go to that Mexican restaurant. The guy at the thrift
on
shop.
the recommendation, because I'm not a huge Mexican food person. I'm very particular about certain types of foods that I don't like, but when it comes to foods that I do like, I'm very wide open. But I'm not a very big person when it comes to Mexican food. However, when you're on these road trips and you do find yourself with some time to kill, I mean, there's the obvious things to go around and do, which is what most of the tourists do. Say, for example, when we were in A&M the first go-around, we had some time to kill, so we headed on over to the Bush Library, which was an interesting experience. But outside of that, Fayetteville, Arkansas, believe it or not, there's stuff to do. I didn't really think there might be, but having never been to Fayetteville, Arkansas, it was definitely an opportunity for me to kind of find out what they did have to offer. So to kind of go back to what Collyn's speaking of, we just kind of go around now. If I'm a big collector, I love collecting things from the 80s, especially action figures, things associated with that, just because there's some good nostalgia to it. That's my era. I grew up watching the G.I. Joe, Transformers, all those cartoons of that time period, and so it's always fun just to kind of go and check out the local comic book stores and and collectible stores and things like that. And in this particular case, we had actually originally gone to a comic book store, which was interesting to say the least. It was pretty jam packed from floor to ceiling, if I remember. I mean, there was not a spot where they did not have something. But for the most part, if you've been to a comic store, there's not much things that they can do differently from one to the next. So we didn't spend a lot of time in there, but we did happen to go next door to the thrift store, which was an adventure in itself because it's always fun to see what kind of stuff people throw away in various areas of the country. And I think the most interesting part of that was just as Collyn was talking about, the gentleman that ran the thrift store highly, highly, highly recommended this Mexican place, which was next door. And, well, I don't know. I'll just let Collyn tell the story. I've talked enough.
It's bad. It was bad. We get in there. Number one, he has to explain a pun to us. So there's this place in Fayetteville called Hertz Donut. I'm actually drinking out of the cup currently. It's this donut place that's phenomenal. I mean, any kind of like special donut you want it's really, really good. So he recommended that, and he's like, it's called Hertz Donut. Do you get it? And he just kind of paused. And we're like, yeah, we get it. We get it, bud. It's not easy, So we did that, but then we were like, so where do we want to go for lunch before that? And he goes, the Mexican place right up the hill. It shares the parking lot with this. I go there like every other day. It's so good. It's phenomenal. This is great. You'll love it. We go, and it's like the most bland Mexican food on the face of the planet. They come over, and they like try to like tell us like, oh, we're trying out this new menu item. Do you want to try it? We're like, yeah, like sure, whatever. It was just chorizo and salsa. Like they just chopped up chorizo and mixed it with salsa and called it a new menu item. It was bad. It was really, 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 really bad.
And for me, being so specific about what types of food that I like, especially when it comes to, like Mexican food or something like that, which is, I won't continually harp on how it's not my favorite, but it didn't taste any different than any other Mexican food that I've had, but it was just, in my opinion, everything about the place. The place was old. It was dingy, which should have been our first clue, but it wasn't good. It definitely wasn't good. So in this particular case, I don't really want to mention names or anything because I want people to be able to have restaurants and such and be able to do that sort of thing, especially with what we're dealing with now. But considering how much our hopes had been raised by this fine young gentleman who worked at the local thrift store, I definitely have to say that I was not thrilled considering how much he talked the place up. So that's kind of my input on that.
But I will say we talked a lot about bad food. Arkansas did have some really, really, really good food. And I'll give it a lot of credit for it.
They absolutely did.
Yeah, I'll give it a lot of credit for exceeding expectations because I went down there not expecting much and was pleasantly surprised. Another one that I really enjoyed, and we really haven't gotten to deal with it a lot just because our trips out there have been flying in day of or into St. Louis, but Columbia, Missouri, Loki has some really, really good food. I mean, phenomenal, blow you out of the water food.
And I'm a pizza guy, so a lot of folks are very, very particular about their pizza. Or their barbecue. I'm the same way, but I'm that way when it comes to pizza. So I will definitely say that as many things about Missouri that I'm not a fan of. They have, I think it's Shakespeare's Pizza, which is right near the campus. That's definitely well worth a visit. It's not going to knock your socks off or anything like that, but it's pretty good. I would put it up with one of the better restaurants that I've had, especially being in Columbia, because we are definitely blessed here to have a few different places that are pretty good when it comes to pizza. So it's always nice to go other places and just and try that out. But that was definitely one of my favorite venues there, and it's just very low key, very nice little atmosphere. Kind of similar to, I would say, Village Idiot, but probably definitely has
different
its
style of pizza, but yeah,
different style, but still worth a visit for sure. And then I guess another place that was kind of hit or miss when it came to food, but there's a couple places that we went that was pretty good, was Greenville, North Carolina for the ECU games at the ECU Regional. that same year as the Arkansas Regional. There's a couple places we hit there that were pretty decent. Um,
We
but
became family.
yeah, we did. That's an interesting story in itself. There's a barbecue place there because, of course, once again we get back into the barbecue, and I'm not a huge fan, but that doesn't mean I won't eat it. But we did go to a location, and I knew I was going to like it because when we walked in, they had a picture of Ivan Koloff on the door. So if you're not a wrestling fan, that will mean nothing to you. But just knowing that these folks had a picture of Ivan Koloff in addition to their other pictures hanging up around the restaurant made me feel like I was at home because that was one of my most hated wrestlers growing up. But as I got older, I really learned to appreciate him. But another story for another day. If you've listened to my Del Wilkes podcast, you'll know that that wrestling is definitely one of those things that I've had a good time with. But we're not going to go down on that tangent. But just to kind of answer or to reference what Collyn's speaking of, the place stays packed. I mean, it's a big one. It's one of those areas where it's literally just a wide open parking lot. And help me, Collyn, with the name on that one because I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it's named after it's what now?
Parker's?
Parker's, yeah. I believe that is correct.
Yeah.
I trust you because you're usually pretty good with the details.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys on road trips that just basically says, what time do I need to wake up and where are we going? And that's as much of the details as I cover. So I always have to let Collyn cover everything else. So we get to the front door. It's not that busy, but it's busy. I mean, it's what you would expect because I think that was a Sunday at lunchtime, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it?
Yeah, we went on Sunday because the game wasn't until later in the day, so we had some time to kill. So we went on a Sunday afternoon at like 1 o'clock, which hindsight probably was the best idea.
But I will say when we walked in, we didn't stand there very long. I mean, it was less than 5 minutes. And apparently the owner came up and he just saw us standing there. I don't know if one of us had a look on our face of disgust or something. I'm not quite sure what it was because I don't think either one of us was in a particularly bad mood that day. We were just kind of feeling the place out like we always do, getting an idea as to, what we're about to get ourselves into. And he comes over and he says, have you guys been waiting? Have you guys been helped? And we was like, no, not yet, and I think he interpreted that as, we've been waiting forever. We need a table, but we hopefully didn't give off that impression. But so immediately this gentleman who I'm pretty sure was one of the owners, at least not part of the actual family itself, personally grabs a waiter and says, these two gentlemen need a table. Go sit them at the family table. So I'm not quite sure what that means, but we did go sit at this one table, which wasn't too terribly far from the register, and then there was a big picture of the wall of what I assumed to be was the whole Parker family who stared at us the whole time we ate. And then in addition to that, he said, make sure these guys get free desserts today and stuff. So I'm not sure what exactly happened there, but it ended up being a pretty good experience. The food was quick. The folks were running around. I mean, the place was well run. I didn't think there was too many things necessarily bad that I could say about the place. I really can't think of anything negative to say. Like I said, the food wasn't the best ever, but it was good. And the fact that we got to sit at the family table, I guess that made it even better. So I guess we are officially part of the Parker family whenever we head down to Greenville, North Carolina.
Well, he did. I mean, we were kind of taken aback. We were sitting there, we're like, well, who cares? Like, we'll wait. We got time to kill. And I mean, he within 2 minutes of us really getting in there or something, he had pulled us to this family table, and we're sitting there in the middle of this damn restaurant, and he's like, make sure they get an apple pie, make sure that you check on them. And we had it wasn't just our waiter that came to check on us. It was 4 different waiters and an owner and a manager that came over and was like, is everything okay? Are you guys doing all right? We're like, yeah, we're fine. It's not a huge deal. And then they gave us anything we wanted, we pretty much got. We ran that restaurant for solid hour just because he thought we were waiting for longer than maybe 2 or 3 minutes, which I think we were waiting for.
Yeah, it wasn't long. I mean, I didn't even have time to post my picture that I took of the Ivan Koloff picture. I didn't even have a chance to get it on Twitter. That's how quickly they took care of us because I was still enamored with the fact that they actually had this picture up, which, that just shows you my simple mind and how my simple mind works. But I guess moving on from food, because we could talk about food forever. Because I guess once you open up that can of worms, so to speak, which I don't know if I should use that analogy when talking about food, but that could definitely be a podcast in itself. And if you run a restaurant and you would be happy to provide food for us, we'll be definitely happy to plug your restaurant for sure. Um, Moving on, I guess some of the other questions that we saw that kind of popped up was best experience, and that's pretty open ended. I'm just trying to think about experiences. What would you say about experiences? What which way should we kind of guide this conversation?
Just like I think, do you want to do it? This is probably a meeting we should have had before the podcast.
Right.
But but I mean, this is very very similar to how our personalities work. We're talking
Well, I
about
mean,
this on the
I'm
fly.
extremely busy these days. Extremely busy.
Oh
For
yeah,
about,
no,
I mean, I don't
we
have a
got no,
lot of free
yeah,
time on my hands.
yeah, no. I mean, it's crossover season. I mean, we got basketball finishing up. We got women's basketball going to the Final Four. We got baseball season in the middle of SEC play. Spring football's finishing up. I mean, we got a lot to talk about.
And that
You want to
typically
do
that would be what's going on right now. So basically, I guess this is an opportunity for me to kind of puff up Collyn a little bit, because this would be the time of year where we have multiple things going on. I know we joke about it, but I know we call Collyn the writer, but that's only a very small fraction of what he does. Because I know, yeah, you spend a good bit of time writing, but in addition to that, if we have travel plans that need to be arranged, Collyn's usually on top of that as far as arranging interviews, things that need to happen. So you catch sometimes, I know, a little bit of grief for some certain things, but Collyn is definitely one of the busiest guys that I've seen, and as I like to call him, I say he's an old man trapped in a young man's body, because if it weren't for Collyn, sometimes I don't know that I would make games at the right time, because he's the guy that goes to bed late but yet somehow still gets up early and make sure that I get up, because Lord knows I love my sleep. But anyway, speaking of, this time would be a very very busy time of year, because we would be on the tail end of men's basketball, women's basketball. You've got football practice going on, baseball is going on. So this is that time of year where normally in a typical year we would have four different things going on that need to be covered. It's not easy to cover all four. We do have some folks that help out. So I'm not saying we as in me, but just the site itself, because obviously I'm not the only one who does what I do. But being that we do have extra time right now, it does give us a chance to kind of run our mouths for anybody who might be interested. But just best experience. There's so many different ways that we could go with this. If we're talking game day experience, then of course there's going to be paths that we could go from there. If you're just talking about overall trip experiences, that's man, that's a whole lot that we could talk about there. So I'm just going to talk about game day experience, just from beginning to end. And I would have to say, from my perspective, and I know Collyn's heard me tell this story multiple times for anybody that'll listen, but as far as game day experience and just things operating at a very, very efficient level, I'm going to go with the University of Tennessee, because you parking, as I stated before, you park right at the stadium, and that's very, very nice for us guys that are carrying guys and girls carrying all that camera equipment, to have a short little walkover, even though it's in the mountains, being able to get, most of the time we're in that parking garage right next to the stadium, and you literally jump on the elevator, which takes you down, and I think we might walk up maybe one or two hills, which aren't that big. You get there, the minute that you walk in, especially for us now, Tennessee's a little different. There's a couple of stadiums like this, but Tennessee's a little different because they separate the media. So if you're a photographer, videographer, you pretty much have to stay down on the field level, which is perfectly fine with me. And then writers, they send you up to the press box. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think pretty much the experience is the same, because I know for us, the minute we get in there, they have a nice layout. Most of the time they have reserved spots for you, because there are places that don't reserve spots, and I can tell you that's if you get there late, you're not going to find a place to sit with all those bags and camera equipment from the multiple photographers. We're talking 50, 60 different people tons of equipment. Everybody's got laptops, computers. Then of course you've got the video guys, and their equipment, of course, is a lot more intensive, so it takes up more space. But Tennessee does a good job of making sure everybody has a spot, and they just feed you nonstop there. So the time you get there, you walk in, they have the pregame meal, which is usually one of the bigger meals that you're going to eat that day. You come in at halftime, they feed you again. After the game, they feed you again. So if you leave Tennessee hungry, it's your own fault.
Yeah, Tennessee is the class. I mean, absolute class of the SEC. You get 3 meals. The press box is a little cramped is not the right word, but space is kind of limited just because there are so many people that cover games, and I'm an older stadium, so you get that a little bit. It's a little cramped, but I mean, vision's perfect. The food is not. I mean, it's not going to blow you out of the water. It's not a 5-course meal, but food's good. You get a lot of it. They have an ice cream machine that you can eat.
You can actually eat the machine. That is correct.
Yeah, you eat the entire machine, nuts and nuts, bolts, everything.
And then they just bring out another machine for the next person.
Yeah, but it's as good as you're going to possibly get for media relations there. And the only drawback I will say is getting to the field, because you have to cut through the stands to get there and snake around. So that's frustrating, but other than that, it's a very, very fun, enjoyable trip.
But I will say, it doesn't bother me to hear you say those certain things, because, you guys come down with your phones and your tablets maybe. Very few times do you come down with a laptop. So I don't feel bad for you for having to cut through the crowd, because...
Hey, I always come down with a laptop. I don't want to hear it.
So, I would just invite you to try to walk through these crowds while you're carrying tons of camera equipment like you have to do, say, at Florida. Even at Clemson, it used to be like that. I've kind of figured out some different ways, even to where I was just like, maybe just find a spot just to kind of park it for the entire game. Because usually you try to go in, especially from a photographer standpoint, because I know you guys are doing stuff constantly from the time the game starts to the time it ends. You're working nonstop, whether it be doing Twitter updates, whether it be compiling stats, or go ahead and start writing your stories, stuff like that. So for us, we do like to usually come in at halftime, try to empty out memory cards if we could get the opportunity. But like you're talking about, when you know that you have to walk through the crowds, and I'm not sure why, because not to take a dig at Florida for any particular reason, but Florida's setup is... I don't even want to call it, maybe non-existent's a good word. Not that we're going in that direction there, but Florida literally has on the field a photo room that is a janitor closet. I kid you not. I think it might be a janitor closet / electrical room. So when you walk in there, there's wires hanging from the ceiling. There's mop buckets, things like that. There's literally, like 2x4s nailed into the wall for folks to put their laptops on. And it is tight. It's cramped. They reserve spots for folks. So, if you're not part of the local media there, you're not going to get to use that room. And I know it sounds like a dump, but when it comes to convenience, a dump is much better than nothing. So if you're not going to use that room, then you're forced to go back to the press box. And like Collyn was alluding to, that's one of those scenarios where there's no easy way to get there. You literally have to climb through the stands, through the aisles, walkways. And that's tough enough when you're just walking by yourself, say like if you're a fan going to the concession stand or something, because it's pretty congested there. So at a place like Florida or Clemson, which is very similar, we generally just carry extra memory cards, park it on the sideline during the half times and stuff, and then just hope that we have enough room to continue to take pictures.
I remember for Georgia this past year, because Georgia's the same way. Because that game obviously went down to the wire, so you're writing everything. You're, trying to update as much as you can as this crazy game happens, and I'm having to snake through people, pissed off Georgia fans, trying to snake through people to try to get to the media room, and you almost miss. You're having people try to escort you to get to where you need to be, and that's not a convenient setup. I'll give Texas A&M a lot of credit. South Carolina does it really well in terms of being able to get from the press box to the media room. Those experiences are really, really good. I like those. And I mean, in terms of game day experience, just in terms of football, Ole Miss is pretty easy. Tennessee is pretty good. Mississippi State was good. I enjoyed Mississippi State. The brief time we got to go and enjoy a little bit of that.
As long as Scott Hood doesn't
Pass us on the go-kart.
right, as long
Or
as
the
Scott
golf cart.
Hood doesn't, as we used to say growing up, doesn't bogart the golf cart. And that's I'll get into that story. It's always good, folks who maybe are here that remember Scott Hood, and maybe some folks who don't know. And I won't say any of the nicknames that I have for Collyn, but Collyn basically came in as Scott Hood was leaving. Now Scott Hood, in his defense, Scott Hood was a content monster. The man could come up with a story. I mean, he would write stories about anything and everything. He pretty much raised the bar when it came to, like covering the different aspects of the sports programs. He would cover the things that at that time nobody had thought to cover. He was one of the first guys that I remember who would, go to pretty much every board meeting and keep everyone updated on what was going on at the board meeting. So Scott Hood was not scared to provide content. Now, as far as the positives, there's some other stuff as well. And, we would say this straight to Scott Hood, and he would probably laugh about it and agree with us. But the one thing that Scott Hood was not was he wasn't, would you say he wasn't very aware?
Awareness was, yes.
So to put it in perspective, we get down to Mississippi State. If you've never been to Mississippi State, it's literally, I don't say this in a bad sense, it's just literally in the middle of nowhere. You're driving down the highway, and then there's trees and forest, and boom, there's a university. Just there it is. It's interesting how when you come up to it, it just kind of shows itself. But so they park you once you get off. I mean, it's pretty accessible as far as by car. It's not like one of these areas where you're going to get stuck in a ton of traffic and stuff like that. Maybe you are, but we usually get there so early that traffic generally isn't that big a deal. But so we get there. They park us behind one of the buildings on campus, and there's a golf cart there to pick us up and take us where we need to go, which is great. Because that's not something that all schools do, so it's nice because number one, it's just nice to not have to walk. Number two, when you're going somewhere for the first time, you have to search and find where the places are you need to be, because there's usually only one area of the stadium that you can get into as far as media access is concerned. So we take the golf cart over. Everything's great other than it just being blazes hot that day. That's something I remember, is the heat there is just different. And, coming from Columbia, where we say it's famously hot, I will say Mississippi State is worse, absolutely worse, and I say that without the slightest bit of hesitation. So we do the game. It's not the greatest game, but the atmosphere and everything's great. I'm not a big fan of the Cowbells, but I guess if you're not a Mississippi State fan, not many people are fond of the Cowbells. So we're leaving. And trying to leave a game on a road trip with Scott Hood is a task in itself. So Collyn and I are finished, and then I'll let Collyn kind of pick it up from there so that I'm not the only one telling these stories, because I want folks to know that it's not just me.
Yeah, so it's like, to understand where we're coming from, this Mississippi State game took forever. There was like a lightning delay involved. South Carolina lost by like 2 touchdowns, and it wasn't even that close. And Scott likes to write. Scott likes to take his time. Scott likes to, peruse every ounce of his 1,000-word story. So he took forever. We had finished writing. We were literally standing outside the stadium waiting for him to get done. And so we were like, all right, Scott. I texted him. I'm like, Scott, we're done. He goes, all right, I'll be out in 10 minutes. Okay, no problem. So 10 minutes turned to 15, turned to 30. So we're like, just screw it. We're going to walk to the car. And, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would say it's probably, a mile or so?
It was a lot of ground to cover, and there was a lot of twists and turns, too, so we were just hoping that we were walking in the right direction.
Yeah, and the problem was when you take a golf cart there, you're not really paying attention to how you're getting there. and the route that the golf cart took might not be the best route to take in terms of if you're walking. So we're sitting there waiting. We're walking and walking, and we hear the golf cart behind us coming up. And there's Scott Hood, the back of this damn golf cart, and he waves to us as we're like half a mile into this mile walk, waving to us. Didn't stop the golf cart, didn't let us on, kept going, and waited for us at the car for like another 15, 20 minutes while we walked the half mile.
And any normal person, and I say this very, very lovingly because I went on a lot of trips with Scott. Not as many as some other folks, but I did go on a lot of trips with Scott. But any other normal person would have said to the person driving the golf cart, "Hey, can we stop and grab these two guys?" But no, we get a courteous wave and watch Scott just kind of ride off into the sunset, so to speak. So yeah, that was interesting. And once again, I know it takes us on a tangent, but it's not all a bed of roses when we go on these trips. Obviously, I've had some good opportunities, good travel opportunities, and things like that. So I'm not going to complain. But yeah, there are the things like that where, at the time, they're pretty infuriating. But then when you look back on it later, all you can do is laugh about it. So yeah, that's kind of where that is, I suppose.
Yeah, and if we're talking about experiences too, I mean, some of the cool stuff that we've gotten to cover. I mean, you've gotten to cover College World Series. You've gotten to cover, Sweet 16s and Elite 8s. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I'll kind of share some of the cool stuff that I've gotten to cover.
And I'm a talker. I'm absolutely a talker. And, whenever Collyn and I get together on a road trip, or if it's more of us on a road trip, because there's been times where we've gone to sometimes maybe even 3 cars deep. I know at least 2, because there's been times where we've had enough folks going on road trips that we had a good little caravan going down of folks going to specifically cover the game. Like I remember in 2010 going down to the to cover the Florida football game that eventually would win the SEC East football championship. I know for sure we had 2 carloads there. There's a Scott Hood story in that one as well, but I'll save that one for another day because that one's probably, if I had a list of Scott Hood stories, that would definitely be my number one. So I'll tell that. So. I will tell that on another day when I have time to fully honor it. But I have had a chance to cover some stuff. I've covered, and I've been doing this for I guess about 12 years now. Which there's some folks who have been doing it far longer than I have. I came along at a good time, and I was really, really lucky and blessed that Shrew gave me an opportunity when he did, because I really kind of came in when a lot of good stuff was happening, and it really provided me with a lot of good opportunities. Because growing up, I've always been a huge sports fan. I was a baseball player growing up. Loved basketball. When I was 10 years old, my dad passed away, and the basketball coach from what was then Anderson College at that time kind of took me in under his wing. So I learned to love the game of basketball at that time too. So that's I've had friends that played football and things of that nature. So I've been around a lot of sports. So just being able to get into it the way that I did and being able to experience what I did was great. Even though I didn't get to go to the 2010 College World Series, I did get to go to the Super Regional down at Coastal Carolina, which was probably the hottest weather I have ever experienced. That was absolutely brutally hot. But when it's as fun and dramatic as that series was, you tend to forget about those things. 2011, I got to go to the entire College World Series from pretty much from the regional to the Super Regional to the College World Series itself. That was amazing. It was a fun time. It was a great run. It taught me that no matter what you do as far as things like that are concerned, you always try to pack smartly, because I found myself a couple of different times running out of clothes, so having to make late night runs to Walmart and stuff like that just to grab necessities. So that was fun. You do there's some things, of course, away from the games there that were fun as well, and none of this would have been possible if Shu hadn't given me an opportunity. But just as far as experiences are concerned, nothing will ever touch the basketball run. Absolutely will not touch that. There's so many stories there as well. Not necessarily great stories, but just things that was, when you're following a run like that, a magical run like that. And one of my favorite cities probably to visit is New York City. So getting to put the two together and sitting on the floor at Madison Square Garden just that atmosphere. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And I don't want to get going too long on that because I could talk forever about that type stuff. But just overall, just getting to cover the things that I have, the folks that I have. I mean, being able to cover Steve Spurrier's career, getting fussed at for Steve Spurrier because I'm taking too many pictures of him, stuff like that. I mean, things that you would never think would happen. That it's just been a good experience just overall. And like I said, at a later time we can definitely go into more detail on those things. But at this point, I'll just kind of defer to you and just your type of experiences because as a writer, you get to cover football, baseball, basketball, some of the things that maybe I don't get to.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously came in at a different time. My freshman year at Carolina was the last of the 11 win years for football. So that was 2013. Basketball since then has obviously been to a Final Four. I did not get to cover that. That was the Scott Hood. I've gotten to cover 2 super regionals for baseball. So that's fun. I think the coolest thing for me in terms of just all this is getting to meet these athletes and getting to meet and interact with some of these coaches. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you told me 10 years ago, I would be on a first name basis with a few of these guys, I would have called you stupid, and I would have been like, oh, that's so amazing. But getting to meet them, like Frank Martin, Will Muschamp, Mark Kingston, Don Staley, and all these, you learn that they're just people. You can have a conversation with them and just talk. And I think that's the conversations that will never see the light of day, just talking, whether it's at a practice, before a game, at a recruiting stop or whatever, just getting to talk to them. That's kind of the coolest part of my job, just being able to interact as people and less as I cover you, you're the guy I cover kind of situation. And getting to meet these athletes who are, they're just college kids. I'm almost 3 years removed from college, but, they're college kids, and getting to interact with them and hear college stories and, do that. That's a lot of fun for me. That's been kind of the coolest part of my job. And I'll never forget the experience that was the coolest for me was putting together that oral history of the 2010, 2011, and 2012 College World Series runs. And all the people that I got to talk to for that was, it's just absolutely out of this world. The fact that my phone rang one day and it said, "Hey, Collyn, this is Whit Merrifield." That's unreal. I think 15-year-old Collyn would have absolutely fainted if that happened. So
I'm sure 23-year-old Collyn probably did faint.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just, it's unreal. And, getting to talk to Mark Calvey, and who's just a phenomenal interview, Christian Walker, Tyler Webb, Sammy Esposito is great. Just those kinds of things. Michael Roth, trying to just kind of go through all the people I talked to, Robert Berry, Adrian Morales. It was unreal how fun and good and just crazy some of the stories that, again, will never see the light of day. Getting to talk and experience that.
And just speaking of Mark Calvey, that man gets a raw deal. I tell
does.
you what, when I was able to cover some of the 2010 season, I can tell you one thing is that Mark Calvey worked so hard, way harder than a lot of people realize. And I know it's kind of a running gag to say fire Calvey, those sorts of things but Calvey had to come in and pick up a lot of pieces, and what he was able to do with, and I say this with complete respect, that ragtag pitching staff that he had to put together, which he, I'm not sure that Michael Roth would have been the Michael Roth without Mark Calvey, to be honest with you, because of the stuff that went on behind the scenes and the calls that were made. And before that Clemson game, Michael Roth was just a role guy. They would bring him in as a reliever periodically just to throw a lefty versus a lefty, and every now and then they'd bring him in just to have a lefty at bat. But I to this day I will say that Mark Calvey gets a raw deal. I know that kind of
Yeah,
takes us on a different tangent there, but to really look at what he was able to do, and he was able to do it in a pretty quick turnaround as well, because there were some things, some areas where the deck was stacked against him. So that's just kind of my little interjection there. But Mark Calvey's a great guy if you've ever had a chance to talk to him, which I know, of course, you did. But he's a good guy, and he's a very, very good coach as well.
the best part was, I mean, we sat down and it was funny. I'm sending all these emails to media relations people and whatnot when I'm working on the story, and I send one to like the South Alabama, SID Sports Information Director, and kind of explain the story. And I said, is there any time to, sit down and just have a phone call with Calvi about it? And 5 minutes later, like, I'm getting a phone call. I'm actually pulling into the gym to go to work out, and I answered. I'm like, "Hello," and he goes, "Collyn, this is Mark Calvi." And I was like, "Coach Calvi, I hate to do this, but I don't have my recorder with me, and I'm about to go for a run. Is there any way I could call you back?" And he's like, "Yeah, no problem." So we end up. I mean, I call him back an hour later once I get back from the gym and shower and all that, and he talked to me for an hour. I mean, just about everything. And it was only 1 year. We only focused on 2010 because that was the only time he was there. We talked for an hour. And it was, he's typical baseball coach, swearing and just being off the cuff. And it was great. And there was one point where, like, he's swearing so much. And I'm like, "Calvi, you do realize, like, you're on the record, right? Like, I'm recording this." He's like, yeah, I know. I was like, all right. Well, as long as you know, I'm cool with it. But, it turned into a great interview. He made fun of some of the Fire Calvi stuff. And that was one of the cooler interviews and experiences I've gotten, was getting to talk to him and getting some of the – because he remembers a lot of that, like, to the T, some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So that was really, really fun to talk to him. And that was one of my better experiences overall, just in terms of getting to interview somebody.
And I know I kind of took us down that path, but one of the things that I've noticed from so many coaches is just their memories are impeccable. They can, yeah. And it seems to be just something to do with these guys, that they can tell you the dates. They can tell you they can almost pretty much tell you the lineup and things like that, and the details they tell you, because there's a couple of times. Where even, Spurrier's on a different level when it comes to just the things that's in his head. He's forgotten more about football than most people know currently. But, people like that, these coaches, their memories are just insane at the details that they can give you. And sometimes you want to fact check them, and you go and you find the clip or something like that, and they're just absolutely dead on accurate to the point that where you know exactly what's going to happen. And just, that's also interesting, because, in some cases it saves you some time and effort, because you don't have to go and do the research. They just tell you.
Yeah.
That's, once again, I did take us kind of onto that tangent there. I guess outside of the best, worst interviews. Now, I know when we talk about experiences, we just kind of segue into the interviews, and I know you're talking about Calvi, and maybe you have some others that are your best. As of today, I will honestly say that all the folks that I've gotten to interview, and I'll just kind of make this kind of a brief wrap up, because I know folks are interested in, like, the worst interviews as well. But, my best interviews, I would say probably Spencer Lanning was great, because he made you feel so comfortable. He wanted to make sure that he gave you something to work with. I know after 2010 down in Florida, when I was interviewing Spencer Lanning, they have like these little makeshift curtains that they hang up to make it look a little more professional. And at Florida, that area is on kind of a slope. So in the middle of the interview, this curtain with these metal rods starts falling over. And of course, Spencer's looking at me while we're doing the interview, and I see behind him this curtain about to fall and this metal rod about to bop him in the head. So real quickly, I had to put the camera down, and at that time it was a little bigger camera than what we're used to using these days, and grab it right before it hits him. So that was an interesting scenario to had that hit him in the head, 2010, I could honestly say that maybe I saved the 2010 season. I don't know, it's possible. That could very well have changed the course of history. Not really, but I like to think that it would have. But he was a great interview, very polite interview. One of my favorite football coaches to interview was Ellis Johnson because he gave you an education every time you spoke with him. He didn't just answer a question. He would just get down and give you the details of what they saw, and you could just see. It was very similar to a Ray Tanner type deal because as a coach, Ray Tanner, I feel like, had like this vision to see 2-3 minutes into the future because he would tell you how he played these scenarios out in his mind. And Ellis Johnson was the same. He was basically playing chess, and he would tell you the things that he went through in his head. And by the time he was finished, you honestly felt like that. Hey, I feel like I'm a football coach now because I understand like the method to the madness. But and not just because it's recent, but my favorite interview as of now, and this is as of a past few days, was interviewing Del Wilkes because we hear so much about what's going on or has gone on since the Lou Holtz Spurrier years, but it seems like football in the 80s has kind of gotten lost with everything that was going on during that time, and that was a lot of fun. And I mean, you talk about somebody who could tell you details and stories and things like that, and a lot of times these are unedited stories, so you get to hear the not so good in addition to the good. But you want to talk about somebody who is more than welcome or more than willing, excuse me, to kind of fill you in on a lot of stuff. That is a great interview, and if you have a question to ask, he's going to answer it. Anybody else you would like to add in addition to the Calvi?
I mean, Frank Martin. I mean, that's one of the first that comes to mind. Frank's really good about the way I always talk about good versus great interviews is I kind of always split it up, and you hear, there's guys that are really good at talking about the big picture stuff. Jake Bentley was really good about talking about big picture things, what this a win would mean for the team, blah, 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 mentality, all that. There are guys and that's a good interview. There are guys that are really good at talking about the intricacies of the game. Carlos Cortez was like that. That's a good interview. You can talk about pitch sequence, and Alex Destino was phenomenal at that. Pitch sequencing and what he was thinking at this point and this whatever. And then there are guys that are good at doing both. And that's what the really, truly great interviews are.
You could add Christian Walker to that list as well, because I remember multiple times being able to talk to him about an at-bat that he had. And you see a lot of hitters kind of go into a little bit of a panic when they get into like an 0-2 count, and pretty much the pitcher is controlled. But Christian Walker was just phenomenal at telling you he had that ability to kind of tell you what he knew a pitcher was going to do. And if you want to go back and watch this so-called poetry in motion, his at-bat versus Coastal Carolina, where he ended up hitting that absolute bomb of a home run, that is one of the most phenomenal at-bats I think I've ever watched just from a strategic standpoint.
Yeah, and you see it all the time. A lot of baseball players are really good at that, but truly the ones where you get both. I mean, Hayden Hurst was great. Really good interview. Ernest Jones is a really, really good interview on the football side of things. Trey Hannibal, great interview. I'm trying to think. Justin Minaya, pretty good at doing a little bit of both. From the baseball side, Justin Rowe is really honest. He's probably one of my favorite all-time athletes to cover. Rowe, Destino was really good. Will Crow was really good. If we're talking about coaches, Mike Bobo, in just the very limited scope that we've gotten to talk to him, has been good. Skylar Meade, the pitching coach, great interview. Bruce Shingler and Chuck Martin are good interviews. I mean, those are the guys that if I'm trying to get just to talk to somebody, those are the ones that I like to get their perspective because I feel like I get smarter when I talk to them. That's the sign of a good interview to me, is if I feel like I've gained something from it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure as a writer, it probably makes your job easier too, because you don't have to create the content. And what I mean by that, of course, is, before I get into that, but like for instance, one of my favorite interviews from a not necessarily thoughtful, insightful kind of interview was interviewing Kelsey Quarles, because he was liable to say anything at any time. And it was always funny to watch how If you don't know, to get a player interview, you literally don't just get to go grab a player and talk to him. It doesn't work like that. You have to go through the media relations, which is a person at USC who you specifically acts as a go-between. They basically tell you, like, okay, these are the players that are going to be available, and before Muschamp, they would be pretty good about giving you who you asked for. Now that Muschamp's here, of course, there's a lot more structure as to who they will and won't let speak and that sort of thing. So, and a lot of times you tend to get the same guys over and over and over just because they're kind of forced into being so-called the face of the program. So after a while, you can't really think of anything to ask them anymore because you pretty much asked them everything, and you pretty much know what they're going to say and that sort of thing. So during the Spurrier area, it didn't matter who it was; they would just about make anybody available to you. So it got to where we would request Kelsey Quarles because we knew that he was probably going to say some stuff. And these guys are coached up; they're told kind of how to handle the media, what to answer, how to answer without really saying a whole lot. So it's always funny because a lot of guys, when the media relations trust them, you can see the media relations folks just kind of release them. But with Kelsey Quarles, there was always a media relations person standing there because he was just so unpredictable what he would say, and a lot of times it was just funny. I mean, there were certain things about it. I got to interview Lottie Ajiboye one time, and we were talking just about what was going on coming up with the Clemson game, and he had no idea who Clemson's quarterback was at that time. I remember asking him, what they had done, and he said, "Who? Who is that? Oh, you mean the quarterback? Oh, yeah." And it's just things like that, which just kind of make interviews a little bit more lighthearted and a little bit more funny. But if you have a chance, go back and check out some of the old Kelsey Quarles interviews because it didn't take him much to kind of get moving in his own direction. We'll just say that.
Yeah, and Javon Kinlaw was the same way. I mean, Javon was great. It took him a while to warm up to, and that's the thing that people don't realize. When these guys get on campus, unless you've been following their recruitment or something, your face is new to them. This is totally new, and the more they're around you, the more they feel comfortable, and the more they're better, just in terms of like giving us what we need. And being personable. So that's one of those things where that helps with that. Javon Kinlaw was great with that. He warmed up to us a lot and obviously gave us some great stuff. That's the one that really jumps out in my mind that I didn't get to mention earlier.
So I guess the natural segue from there would be to worst interviews, and I guess there's a lot of different ways of interpreting this because, we could go in a direction of, guys that, maybe they weren't the most pleasant, things like that. I guess I'll tend to maybe try to avoid that just because it's a lot of times it's real easy to maybe misinterpret something. But I would have to say the two that jump out in my mind as just the most difficult interviews, number one would be Sam Muldrow. Easily number one. If you ask anybody that was a member of the media, Sam Muldrow had zero intentions of talking to the media, even when they basically told him he didn't have a choice. And it wasn't rude necessarily, because there's definitely been some times where I've spoken with folks in the, just trying to do interviews, and they weren't the most pleasant of people. But I will say that Sam Muldrow, it was almost like he had a contest, an unspoken contest, to answer as many things as he could in as few words as possible. So basically, an interview with him would be him responding with "Yep," "Nope," "Yep," "Nope," and there was zero context. So that was difficult. But in the minute that they released him, he just had this big smile on his face. So it was in his mind, it was probably like, "Hey, mission accomplished." But that was the most difficult interviews that I've done, honestly. And I know I said too, I will throw in that the most awkward interview that I've ever been a part of doing University of Florida when Tim Tebow was quarterback. Because at that time I was actually following games. I would go cover the press conference of the visiting coaches. So we're in a small little room at Williams-Brice Stadium because they don't do coaches in the same, like the home team has their own interview area, the visitor team has their own interview area. and we're literally in there waiting. And of course, we know we're going to get Tebow because they just won. Of course, Tebow had one of his out of this world type games that he typically had, and literally Florida's information person stands up and goes, everyone, please, please, quiet, quiet, quiet. Tim Tebow is about to enter the room. So we're all sitting there basically like, okay, we feel like that we're at the royal hall and the royal family is about to enter the room is how we were made to feel, almost that we were in the presence of greatness and that we should respect and show. And it was really an awkward situation because especially the South Carolina contingency that was sitting there was like, wait, what? Did you really ask us to be quiet and essentially tell us to show respect because Tim Tebow was about to enter the room? So that was awkward, to say the least. Probably, as far as South Carolina players are concerned, and this is not said in a negative way whatsoever, because obviously he was a very good South Carolina player, continues to play in the NFL, but interviewing Alshon Jeffrey was always a task as well. And I have one of the privileges of saying that I got to interview Alshon as a Gamecock before anybody else did. And he had obviously not been coached up at that point. So talking to him at that time, it was just me, it was just him. He was straight out of high school. This was his first time being put in front of a media member. And I would ask a question and he would just look at me and say, I don't want to answer that. And I wasn't asking any off-the-wall, groundbreaking questions. It was just simple questions that you would ask pretty much any football player, and he just decided that he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And it was a very awkward interview that I had to go and edit most of it out because it was just me trying to find something that he was willing to talk about. And once again, I wasn't asking anything groundbreaking, and that just kind of continued to be a thing. I know whenever you would interview him. Now, the one thing I will say in his defense, he was a very emotional guy. So after a game in which they lost or something like that, you could tell that it just kind of stuck with him. He hated to lose. So when you're trying to interview a guy off a tough loss, you're going to get some very honest responses. And he was a guy that was very honest. And even now, if you go on YouTube, things like that, you can find out where that's something that he still does with somebody that's trying to do an interview. Is he's very, very candid. If he doesn't feel like being interviewed, he will tell you he doesn't want to be interviewed. If you're annoying him, he's going to tell you you're annoying him. So that was probably one of the more difficult scenarios that I faced.
Yeah, and you can be a bad interview for a lot of reasons. A lot of guys go in there trying not to say anything. Like, they're coached up. So you get a little bit of like, I don't want to say anything that's, going to give them any bulletin board material to write about. I don't want to say anything that's going to, stuff like that. So a lot of guys, and sometimes you're just a quiet person. So, quiet people tend not to be great interviews sometimes, and they have to warm up to you. And Deebo Samuel wasn't a great interview. Good player, but, didn't really want to say a whole lot in terms of, like, giving the other team, bulletin board material or whatever. And that was just something that he did. And there were some others that were kind of like that too. They're all just kind of that same mold. I'm trying to think some other ones that weren't great interviews. Brian Edwards never really wanted to say a whole lot to the media. He was more than accommodating. He would stay as long as you wanted him to, but I just think that he was one of those guys that kind of like in that Deebo mold of I don't want to say anything that's going to give the other team any kind of ammo on me. But I'll give both of them credit. They'll sit there and they answered all the questions that you wanted answered, and that's kind of the way it was. And AJ Lawson, to a degree, he just gets a little shy in media settings, and that kind of leads to some shorter answers. He's been good. AJ Lawson was really good when you get him kind of one-on-one. That's when he kind of shines, but when he's up on a podium, he gets a little shyer. So that doesn't lead to some long-winded or insightful answers. But most of the guys that you get to talk to are pretty solid.
And it's interesting that you bring up Brian Edwards because some of the times that I've spoken with him has actually been one of my better interviews. So it just goes to show that it's it's situational as well. You know, especially in my scenario where when I'm usually doing interviews, it's usually prior to the season starting. They're not really reactionary type interviews after a game or whatnot. So when you have chance to sit down and actually plan what you're going to ask the circumstances surrounding it do make it easier because, you know, when you're dealing with a player who just came off a tough loss or something like that, there's some folks who don't mind asking tough questions, but, you know, sometimes you do want to just kind of ask something that's, you know, needs to be asked versus things that maybe you just want to know. And so, you know, the circumstances surrounding the interview a lot of times play into how a player reacts as well. So I'm sure if I would have caught Sam Muldrow preseason before anything's getting going and stuff like that, then I'm sure he would have maybe given me a little bit more. But when you get into the middle of a season or into the meat of a season and guys are tired and they're being asked the same questions over and over and over again, it's definitely understandable that you're going to get some responses that, you know, probably aren't what you were hoping for. But there's a lot more that goes into interviews than just asking questions and getting answers. And that's something that if you've never done an interview, then you just have to find your own way. Because sometimes if you're not prepared, then you can just be there out on an island is what it feels like sometimes when you get somebody who's thinking or that maybe you're not prepared or whatever the case is, or maybe you had a great question and they answer it in not so many words and then you're not quite ready to move on from there because you wanted more. So there's definitely an art to it. Definitely an art to it when it comes to speaking to these guys, but some of them, honestly, they're just not going to give you what you want, and you just got to move on.
And it's not like in a bad way.
Not at all.
And it's always just, I mean, sometimes personalities are like that. Darius Hutcherson's a very quiet guy, so, you know, when he's talking to you and you're talking to him, he's going to give you short answers just because he's very quiet and doesn't like to talk a whole lot. That's just sometimes personality. When you're a journalist, it kind of, you know, you're trying to get the longest, most detailed answers possible, and if that's just not your personality, that's just not your personality. So some of that goes into it as well, and but for the most part, guys, they've been coached up enough to give us what we want and be as insightful as they can possibly be over the course of a season, preseason, whatever you want to say there.
And I think that's a good place to wrap up for today because there's so many different things that we could get into, and we probably actually went a little longer than we anticipated, but kind of anticipated there. Well, I shouldn't say anticipate so much, but I kind of thought that might actually happen just because once you kind of get that ball rolling, it's hard to stop it, and there's so many different directions you can go with it. So we appreciate everybody that sent in questions, and I know we didn't get to speak on all the topics that folks brought up. I promise you that we have time. So there's a very good chance that there will be a part 2 to this, and I hope that some folks will ask some more questions to kind of get us steering, because otherwise we're going to talk about the things that we remember. But I know in my situation sometimes I kind of forget that the things that I take for granted are things that people just don't know about. So it's always good to get guidance in the way of folks asking questions. So we greatly appreciate that. I know I put in there that I was going to give a prize to the person who kind of asked what I consider to be one of the better questions, and that doesn't mean all the other questions weren't good, but I will say that Samurai Cut, even though I called you out because I anticipated that I wouldn't have to give you a prize with you being, I think, in Taiwan, but since you do have family members with a local address, I will say that I appreciate your input. If you don't mind, just go on to the website, send me a personal message with an address that I can send something to you, and I will get that in the mail as quickly as I can because I really appreciate the insightful questions. Once again, not saying any of the other questions weren't as great, but we really do appreciate folks taking the time to give us opportunities to things that we can talk about and hopefully give you guys something to listen to pass the time while we're dealing with what we're dealing with. So, Collyn, I don't know, any final words that you would like to include?
I enjoyed doing this with you. That we don't get to spend enough time. We don't get to spend enough time together during the year. And now that we're in quarantine, I don't know when the next time I'm going to see you. So
yeah, it's
nice
strange.
To kind of reminisce.
I mean, even with just the everyday routines that we get into, showing up to games and stuff like that, it's always interesting because regardless of the fact that we're all coming from our various locations and stuff like that, there's a consistency there that when it just gets ripped out from underneath you, it's definitely been an adjustment. And it's always fun to catch up with familiar faces and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. Once again, I hope everybody else, regardless of where you are or what you're doing right now, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're taking this seriously. I know it's not fun to stay at home because, trust me, there's plenty of things that I could be doing right now, but that's just not as important as trying to get through this mess. But outside of that, please keep your questions coming because we greatly, greatly appreciate it. Collyn and I have spent a lot of time together on a lot of road trips. Things that we may not see as being great stories may end up being very interesting, and we're willing to talk about a lot of stuff. So by all means, definitely let those questions flow, and we'll address them as much as we can. Maybe next time I won't be as long-winded because I feel like I kind of dominated this conversation. So maybe next time I'll let Collyn take the lead. What you think?
You dominate most conversations, but usually when we hang out, it's a lot of me going,
And all the thoughts that must be going through your head as well.
Yeah. Well, they're mostly good. I would say about
Mostly
85% are good.
Well,
85%
hey,
are good.
as long as I can keep an approval level of at least 55%, I think I'm doing good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, sweet deal. Well, appreciate your time, sir. Once again, stay safe. And if there's anything else that we can provide content-wise, definitely shoot us a message, make a post, something like that, and we'll see what we can do for you. So we greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening.